Good evening. More and more people in British Columbia are wondering out loud when our Premier, Mr. Van der Zalm, has any time to run the government. He seems to be travelling the province as if he was still campaigning for the leadership of the Social Credit Party. And as I told him the other night, the honeymoon is still on between he and the media because he hasn't done anything yet in the way of job creation. But I want to tell you a little piece of inside gossip. It may well be that Premier Van der Zalm and his Principal Secretary, David Poole, have bitten off more than they can chew. I happen to know that the Premier has ordered that in the case of all personal service contracts with the government, which are new or are to be renewed, they must be taken to his office for vetting. What he's obviously looking for is contracts which are too rich, contracts which aren't properly fulfilled, contracts which have fancy severance provisions on them. Do you know how many such contracts there are? In all levels of government departments, crown corporations, etc., etc., etc. Well over 5,000. And Premier Van der Zalm has committed himself to see each and every contract up for new and renewal. Mind you, maybe he's counting on propaganda value. The word gets out as it does tonight, and people think, we don't need this personal service contract to be so healthy or so long-lasting, and maybe that alone. But at the moment, the plans are that they're going to take the personal service contracts and wheelbarrow loads to the Premier's office so that he and David Poole can review them. Some are a couple of $100, I should imagine, but some are very rich and very extensive. Just thought I'd let all you people and all the allied services to the government, doesn't affect BCGEU people at all, it may please them, that your personal service contract, for whatever it is, will shortly be up for review by the Premier himself. Now here's Ted with a rundown.
The damaged nuclear reactor at Chernobyl is sealed in concrete, but how much damage still lingers? Tonight with Webster, Dr. Sidney Alexander, a founding member of Physicians for Social Responsibility. What do the Tory troubles look like from their own backbench? And are all Conservatives for capital punishment? Webster gets the answers from federal MP for Capilano, Mary Collins. Are Vancouver students going to learn about AIDS prevention in school? The city's still beset with the problem, but Vancouver School Board Chairman Ken Denike has done a personal about-face on the issue, and he's up first with Webster.
Mr. Denike, have you done a personal about-face? I saw something, a report which said that you weren't going to be pressured by Blatherwick, the city's medical health officer. You were going to run your own scheme, and now you and he appeared today and seem to be agreed on everything that has to be done.
The only level that we've had any controversy was to do with the mandatory nature of a program. We have been in cooperation, we've worked together for a period of time, looking at the programs, looking at what needs to be done. The Vancouver School Board is very reluctant to go with a mandatory program. Dr. John is proposing a mandatory program for our students. We're worried about backlash if we do that.
And of course there couldn't be a mandatory program for the independent or the Catholic schools, could there?
No.
So how are you going to update your program starting now to include education about this fearsome business AIDS?
We're going on a two-pronged strategy. The one prong is to have a crash course put together for our students who are graduating in June, whether they're grade 12 or other students in the alternate program. We'll have that into all the schools by June, probably in May. We're putting the program together within the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we'll have that ready to go. We'll have it in place with the counselors actually in those schools presenting the material. The second prong is a long-term developmental, where we're going to look at the overall education program that we have from grade 8 on up, and that we're going to bring this in with the agreement of the community.
Now, let me get this quite clear. This special program you're going to put in for grade 12 students, about 3,000 graduating in June this year, plus the alternative students, that's going to be specifically, not guidance as such, but education on the problem of AIDS.
That's correct.
That's a specific program.
That's correct.
At what age, though, will you fit AIDS into your family life education, I believe, which starts in grade 8?
We now do it in some programs in grade 8. There are components of that we've had people from AIDS Vancouver in to present, along with, say, the school nurse, to present material on AIDS at those grades, albeit for the most part it's grade 10.
Now, it's not mandatory as far as you're concerned at this moment.
It's not mandatory. They're locally based. There's a certain unevenness in presentation across the city, but where you have areas where we have strong parent groups who are supportive, in principle we have it. Other places where we're getting opposition or the teachers feel very uncomfortable with it, we have very little, and that's our concern.
But you would agree with me that the children reaching the age of sexual activity must be warned about this problem?
Correct.
You don't go along with Graham Waymark's what you would regard as uncouth idea to involve condom dispensing machines in the schools.
No, I don't. And Dr. John and I agree on that one.
Yeah, that's a bit, although who knows how bad it might get. If we believe all the forecasts, there's nothing but trouble ahead, right?
Yes, but if we get this impact group, which in 5 years will be the impact group, we may be able to handle the problem directly. This has been the problem. San Francisco did not get them in time. I think we can.
Well, we have a very heavy population of positive AIDS carriers in British Columbia, if you take Blatherwick's figure of 10,000 in Vancouver alone. And by 1991, we'll have 1,000 cases occurring each year. The trouble is they never say whether that's an ARC or positive AIDS.
That's correct.
Now, when do you expect children born with the positive AIDS virus to appear in school?
If they're born with the positive AIDS virus, well, if that sort of problem would not be for another 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm. What, do you have any policy right now? Well, first of all, a simple, straightforward question. Has AIDS, either the positive virus or ARC, the AIDS-related complex, yet appeared in any of the Vancouver schools to your knowledge?
Not to students.
Not to students. Could you amplify that, please?
Well, we have had no students who have had AIDS. We do have policy to deal with it if it's reported, that we handle in a fairly sensitive way coming out of the Atlantic Medical Center. The same kind of procedures that are in place in a number of U.S. school centers such as New York, Chicago, and San Francisco.
That means some kind of special hygiene for those working around people carrying the virus, or with ARC?
With ARC.
With ARC we're talking about.
Yes.
When you say you don't have it with students, does that mean that, and far be it from me to cause panic and hysteria and all the rest of it, you have some AIDS cases working in the system at the moment?
We're concerned about that.
You're concerned about it?
Yes.
You mean you're fearful of it, it hasn't yet appeared?
I do not know of any cases at this point.
And have you set up a policy for staff and teachers, or is it the same policy all the way through staff, teachers, and if it should unfortunately go to younger age groups, them too?
That's correct.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
Yes.
Because how do you, under the guidance program, that is still optional, is it not?
It's optional, yes, but we can...
With the multiplicity of ethnic and religious backgrounds in your school, have you had any difficulty with straightforward guidance programs, family life kind of thing?
I would say we're reaching 98% of the students in the grades 8, 9, and 10 at the moment, that we have very little backlash, but then again it's been done in a very quiet way up until now. Mm-hmm. That we have tried not to make it controversial. We fit it into programs. We have informed parents, and parents, once informed and talked about, and they talk about it, have accepted it.
Mm-hmm. It's very difficult not to make it controversial when the Premier of the province, his principal defense for people against AIDS is of course abstinence.
Yes.
And you don't go that far. You say that children whose parents approve must be given some clinical knowledge of how AIDS is transferred.
That's correct.
Now, when the provincial government, they've promised us, Van der Zalm promised me guidelines within 60 days, which is about the end of this month. What effect will these guidelines have on Vancouver School Board policies?
Well, we'll have an opportunity to look at the guidelines in the near future. There's a report going to Cabinet that we also will see. We'll have a chance to see whether we can mutually agree to that, but they are guidelines. The jurisdiction for sex education in this province is at the school board level. We are responsible for it.
And it must stay there. The only way it could be taken away from you is with some particular change in legislation.
That's basically correct. They could mandate it, but they'd have to mandate it for the whole for every
You
program.
did tell me earlier in the program that you are, quote, concerned about the presence of AIDS in the system, but not among the pupils. Have you had to apply your specific, whatever, philosophy or instructions yet in the Vancouver system?
I would have to say that there is a concern in one school and that we are beginning to look into the situation, but it's not positive as yet.
Is this a positive AIDS carrier or an ARC case?
I believe it's positive.
Positive. Well, that's not quite so compellingly troublesome.
No.
Have you consulted with the Teachers Union, BC Teachers Federation on this subject yet?
Not as yet.
You're almost bound to, aren't you?
Yes.
Your questions and calls to Ken Denike, got it right, Chairman of the Vancouver School Board, after the break. Ken Denike is the chairman of the Vancouver School Board, and we're back, public health message, conscience, everything, because in all my years as a reporter, I don't think I've ever come across a problem so grave as this one in terms of public health. I was reminding somebody the other night how up until about the early 40s, syphilis was incurable and was a disaster, but a much longer range disaster. It was cured, and hopefully somebody will come up with the antidote for this. Well, we'll go to the calls. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster, as far as the school board right now is concerned, they're so concerned with the children abstaining from sex right now. My main concern is the showers that the children take after gym courses and everything. I mean, this only enhances the children to be more aware of their sexual ability and everything. And I don't understand why they have such public showers amongst the children the way they do.
Okay, we'll take a question on that basis. Is there any danger in public showers?
None. None to do with AIDS. I think she's speaking of other things, of sexuality, but not AIDS.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I think the media has been fairly positive with regard to condoms appearing in the convenience store, and that they should be, but I think the school board should be equally responsible in having them available in the washrooms, because you don't want to wait for people to start falling dead.
Okay, we'll put that to Ken.
I think we'd be responsible in terms of the education in the process, but not in terms of distributing product. That's something that the private section does better. Where there was distribution, there was vandalism. There's problems of that kind. Now, what do you do in that situation?
Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. One quick question I just want to pin Mr. Denike down on. He said he was not aware of any AIDS-related or AIDS cases within the support services of the Vancouver School Board, the teachers, janitors, what have you, not students. However, is the Vancouver School Board aware of any AIDS cases within its system?
Well, you said you were concerned, and I think you mentioned one school, and I got the impression of one possible carrier.
That's correct. Not ARC, not
The Vancouver School Board is not aware of any AIDS within its system, students or otherwise.
Well, you've got to, certainly not students, you've got to define the difference between positive AIDS carrier and AIDS-related complex, which is the kind of...
positive AIDS carrier, sir.
That's right. Well, he said one, perhaps, in one school.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'd just like to make a quick comment. I think it is great that it's finally coming to the Vancouver School Board. I think grade 12 is a little late. I think it should start a little earlier
But
than
you're
that.
doing the grade 12 for a reason, to get them before they leave school this year.
That's right. It will be an intensive program throughout the school. And
Will
we'll
it
be
start
developing
earlier
that.
next year?
Yes, it will.
Start at what, grade 8?
It will, in some schools already starting in grade 8.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good evening. I'm a bit concerned about the way that, it's getting worse, right, AIDS? And I'm thinking that what we should do, and a lot of people are starting to think that it's possible that we should start doing mandatory testing and just quarantine the problem. It might sound a little ignorant, like unhumanitarian, but this thing could explode in the next few years, and it's not something we should take very lightly.
It's a reasonable fear, but I don't think there is any demand yet for quarantine far less isolation, especially when positive AIDS carriers do not have the ARC. I'm right on that, am I not, Ken?
That's correct. That's what we hear from the medical authorities.
Go ahead from Sydney, BC.
Yeah, I can. I think that it should be made mandatory for Roman Catholic schools.
Oh, now that's a kind of silly remark. You can't make things... You're talking about pupils in schools of the Roman Catholic faith.
No. We're dealing with the public school system and not the private schools of the province.
The private schools, according to the guidelines given by... They'll probably follow Van der Zam's guidelines, and we'll see whether or not these are going to be mandatory. Would you bet any money on them being made mandatory by Mr. Van der Zam?
I'd bet on it.
That they're not, they won't be?
That's correct.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, good afternoon. To you or your guest, Jack, I'm a little concerned about the possibility of the faculty members having AIDS. Now, being a completely tolerant man and not being at all discriminatory, and I understand the problems these people have, I still think there is something wrong where there's a possibility that the teachers or the headmaster or the principal or whomsoever might be involved with this kind of thing and in contact with my kids.
No.
What's my answer now?
Okay, can you give me an answer to that?
Well, I can give them an answer that given the number of people in the system, it would be almost impossible to go through and screen out. And I think in terms of human rights, we wouldn't want to.
No, I don't think it would. And furthermore, the same ratio of risk is there within the general population precisely.
Right.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack. I'm glad to hear you use the word grave. Yesterday, I watched 2 hours, the Oprah Winfrey Show and the Phil Donahue Show.
What's your point, ma'am?
The doctors gave statistics, and they said that in 3 years, 1 in 5, and these are doctors and researchers, 1 in 5 people will have AIDS by 1990. Now, whether they meant the United States or North America...
They meant positive AIDS reaction, perhaps. It doesn't mean 1 in 5 are going to have AIDS. The last figure I got from Hilary Wass, who is our resident expert on the subject, was that they believe that about 30% of people carrying the positive AIDS virus will develop it over a period of years.
That's right.
Well, there's every reason for grave concern. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good afternoon. I would like to express my opinion that we must educate the high school about the AIDS, telling them everything about it from the start to the finish. That means from catching the virus up to the person's deathbed. And also, I disagree that there must be a guideline between Catholic and a public school about.
Well, fair enough, ma'am, but this is still a free country, and the guidelines. I mean, I've had Father Mildenhall on, who, of course, is anathema to anything other than the highest moral teaching, with abstinence as the key factor. Hardly practical, is it, Ken?
Not practical in our schools.
So let me think if there's anything I missed with you. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
One thing I'd like to ask a question of your guest is, how does he know there's only one AIDS carrier in the school system?
Good question.
I would be notified immediately by the health officials as they know. It's part of the... I'd be probably the first one to be notified in the school system that there was a case, or maybe the second or third, depending on where the reporting went. But if it's a report to the health authorities, I've asked to, and it's been agreed that I'd be notified.
The public health authorities have agreed to notify the Vancouver School Board of any cases of positive AIDS carriers who are identified with the support staff. Will that not cause an outcry as a breach of confidentiality?
Well, the difficulty here is that if we don't know about it, we can hardly deal with it. And if you look at our policy, which is to maintain confidentiality, we're also responsible for training those people who work around the individual who has positive AIDS and who has anything going beyond that in terms of the acquired immune deficiency.
So your policy to deal with any cases which appear for sure in the school board are, 1, total confidentiality for the person.
That's correct.
But at the same time, you've got to inform those in the work area of certain things.
Yes, they've got to. Their pattern of work, what they're looking for, and that has got to be changed. They need to be trained for that. And we have to do that within the degree of confidentiality we can maintain, as much confidentiality as we can to protect the individual.
Well, congratulations on your plan to inform the 3,000 high school graduates this summer, and I wish you well, because storms are going to blow over this as sure as God made little apples.
Well, I hope not. I hope the public is supportive.
My thanks to Ken Denike, the chairman of the Vancouver School Board. Next, another deadly subject, Chernobyl and radiation. Jolly evening this evening after the break. My next guest is Dr. Sidney Alexander, immediate past president of the U.S. Physicians for Social Responsibility. And he was one of a group of doctors who went to Moscow after the Chernobyl disaster, and they were the first people from outside the Soviet Union to see the victims of Chernobyl. What was the final count on death and disaster among people?
When we were there, it was 26. I think the final count is in the low 30s. So direct deaths, the number was relatively small.
Now, you're a cardiologist to trade, you're not, but you went there as a doctor to have a look at the victims to see if you could help.
We were at a meeting in Cologne, Germany, of the International Physicians. We asked our Soviet colleagues if we could see them, and they said, of course. They also promised us a trip to Chernobyl, which we didn't get. The helicopter we were supposed to fly in never showed up.
Well, maybe it's just as well. Now, that was finally sealed in concrete, wasn't it?
Yes.
Let's see some of the slides you brought back with me. If you hold them up for a second, Pat, we'll get an explanation from each one. What's that?
That is the isolation precaution for the victims. One of the major problems acutely is loss of the white blood cells, so they can't fight infection. And they're very subject to infection, and that is a patient I examined, and you can see his skin burns. Now, the burns relate to the actual direct effects, and there's a close-up of them. That is not a long-term radiation effect.
Was he outside or inside the reactor?
He was inside.
What's that?
Those are a group of Soviet people monitoring the fields for radioactivity. They're very, very correctly dressed to prevent them from any of the radioactivity either getting on the skin or inhaling. And that's a picture of the people fighting the blaze. This wasn't a nuclear explosion. It was a fire. It was a hydrogen explosion. Hydrogen gas exploded and blew the roof off. And so the radioactivity went up, and that's how we found out about it.
And this?
That's a special picture. That is the Nobel Peace Prize, and that was our celebration, the American delegation. I'm not sure there are any Canadians there, but there were certainly Canadians in Oslo at the time.
Now, just I hate to ask you, I should know the answer. Who got the Nobel Peace Prize?
The International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. We are the U.S. affiliate. Canada, of course, has a very prominent affiliate, and the organization won the prize. Dr. Lown from the United States and Dr. Chazoff were on the stage, but there were a group of us supporting characters, I suppose, who were there as well.
Well, now, you had hoped, you had presumed that you would never actually see victims of radiation. These people inside the plant were severely, instantly burned.
Yes, and those were the ones who died immediately. What the long-term effects were, or will be, we don't know. It was a very memorable and personal experience. I've been involved in this for a long time, but this was the first time we had actually seen radiation effects.
It's too short a time. When was the explosion, the fire?
The morning of April 26th.
So that's just a year ago now.
Yeah.
So it's far too short a period for you to be able to tell me out of any data on, for instance, what happened to people with minor or comparatively minor radiation exposure at the time.
We don't know. There are a range of estimates. The interesting thing, there are no data, and Chernobyl is the benchmark experiment. And if we are allowed, the world, an international group is allowed to monitor what happens, we will have data that could not, I hope never, be replicated. And we will know what the effects of low radiation exposure are.
Because there were many thousands of people who lived around Chernobyl.
100,000 were evacuated.
And would each and every one of these 100,000, especially younger women, have a reasonable fear that they'll give birth to some deformed child or lead a shorter life or get some form of cancer?
Just before we got to Moscow to look at these folks, we were touring East and West Germany, and the hysteria in Europe was incredible. It's like your last interviewer in AIDS. It's an unseen danger. People don't know a lot about it. They're very fearful. There were women begging for abortions who were only a few weeks pregnant. There were it was used for political purposes. The West Germans used it as a way of getting at the Russians. The East Germans, no problem. It was really remarkable.
The East Germans accepted it politically as the price of being part of the Soviet bloc.
They felt that it was being put out of all proportion by the West as a way of, as an anti-Soviet.
Now, you mixed with your Russian colleagues in Moscow. What did they feel about it?
The Russian doctors were, I think, very upfront and very realistic. It took a while, and when the Soviet government first reacted was no knowledge of it at all, just the way they report airline crashes. And Western European public opinion was finally forced them out of their shell. And after that, they were very forthcoming. And at the International Physicians Meeting in Cologne was the first and most up-to-date published report of just exactly what's happened. And they've been excellent about that since.
Oh, have you got a deal whereby the international people like yourself and the international body can monitor medically what happens down the year? Or will you have access to Soviet data?
This will be a group of international scientists, we believe, not our organization. These will be cancer specialists and radiation specialists who are doing this. The Russians have already submitted to an international congress in Vienna the data thus far.
You know, not to get into politics too much, but I have the dreadful feeling, maybe it's a good feeling, that Gorbachev is changing things in the Soviet Union. Am I wrong, or did you get a feeling this time? That wasn't your first time in Moscow, was it?
I've been there several times.
Did you get the feeling that there is a more openness, more easiness about it on ordinary professional contact?
Can I tell you a story about that?
Yes, please.
I was having dinner with a very important physician, a group in the Soviet Union, and he began to talk about, this was last summer, the winds of change that were sweeping through Moscow and how people were so excited about what Gorbachev was going to do. And he urged us to do as if we had a lot of power over our government, to come back and tell the people in the United States that this is happening. And he said, things are going to be better, things are going to be better. And I said, if things haven't been so good, why haven't you told us about it?
Listen, I might have time to squeeze a couple of phone calls into this segment. I think they put the numbers up, didn't you, Pat? But tonight at the Vancouver Museums and Planetarium, this is my conscience bit for campaigns against nuclear war, Dr. Sidney Alexander and a couple of other doctors, you yourself. Vancouver Museum and Planetarium in the auditorium at 1100 Chestnut. Oh, there it is up there. 8 p.m. tonight. And if you want to meet this deadly serious but very informative American medical specialist who is in Moscow, please feel free to go. I'm going to take a couple of calls, even though it's only one segment. Where's that one? Funny one. Go ahead from Yellowknife.
Yes, I would like to ask Dr. Alexander what he thinks of the policy of Ontario Hydro of building so many reactors near the city of Toronto.
Well, you might not ask him that specifically, but you might ask him what he thinks about building nuclear reactors for power.
Yes, that's a good question.
Okay, let's hear the answer.
It is a good question, and I must say that I am not an expert on nuclear power, and I think that has to be put in an economic context. I can tell you that doctors have a responsibility to make the people aware and to find out about the effects of what this will do. I think the whole nuclear power industry the long-term consequences of this were not thought through.
Oh, no. Well, we've got Hanford up here just across the border from us, which I'm sure is an old-fashioned, antiquated plant which has to be redone completely, I understand.
The only specific program we had on this, as far as the United States, was to plead with our government to turn Hanford off and make it safe, because it's a lot like Chernobyl.
Yeah. And it's a time bomb,
It's
perhaps.
a time bomb.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. I'm from Toronto also, and I was just wondering about that Pickering plant that's there, and wondering whether or not you think that maybe those plants shouldn't be so close to a large metropolitan city like Toronto.
Same question. We've had governments with policies of no nuclear at all, no nuclear power, but we've just lifted the moratorium on uranium mining. What do you think of that?
I think that I would ask the major issue there is why? Why are we mining uranium?
Only for nuclear plants, isn't it?
And not for nuclear weapons?
Oh, only for nuclear weapons?
Only for nuclear weapons. Well, I have a lot of opinion about that. I don't think we need any more, and we need a lot less.
Go ahead. If AIDS doesn't get us, nuclear bomb will get us. That's a joke. Go ahead, please.
I was in Western Europe, actually in England, with my family, 2 teenage daughters and my wife, when at the time of this explosion in Chernobyl, and we saw quite a bit of it on TV there, of course, and they were destroying milk in Britain and things like this. I'd like to know if there is any danger whatsoever to my daughter specifically, and or the rest of us in the family, as a result of that cloud that passed over.
Oh, that's hardly a fair question to you. Give it a stab.
The radioactivity was very sporadic. There were certain pockets depending on where the wind blew. And if you washed your vegetables and were in an area that did not have high levels of radioactivity, your risks are minimal.
Look, I'm grateful for your presence here tonight. You're from Boston and you don't have a Boston accent. Something wrong with you.
I'm trying. I've only been there 40 years.
And you can hear Dr. Alexander tonight at the planetarium at 8 p.m. Thank you, Doc. There it is up there. Back after the break. No yet, love.
You don't. Oh, you don't know until you. Is that too low?
I have been remiss in my reportorial duty in that. How many years have you been in the House of Commons, ma'am?
2.5.
How many times have you been on the Webster program?
Once.
You were on once before?
Once, last March the 26th, I believe.
I forgot all about it.
What an impression I made on you.
Now, look, you're a Tory, and I shouldn't even be nice to you. You would agree, would you not?
Well, I think you should be nice to Tories. In fact, I think people should be especially nice to Tories these days.
These days, when you don't show in the polls, when the undecided are in greater numbers than you are, and when your 7th cabinet minister went down the tube yesterday.
Well, that was expected. That wasn't a surprise. But I think, well, I don't think the public has had a chance to evaluate what we've really done. Now, the scandals and all that has certainly detracted from our agenda. But we're getting back on track, and just look at the things that have come out this week.
All right, as a matter of fact, you've probably gone up 5 or 6 points in the polls today with the announcement of your new draconian regulations to stop the flood of refugees, homeless and hungry, into Canada. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's right. I'll tell you, that was something that we as caucus members have been telling the ministers, because we were hearing that from our constituents. My phone was ringing off the hook and saying, you know, we have to do something. We got to control our destiny as a country, control our doors. And it was because people felt that so many of those claiming refugee status weren't really genuine refugees, and it's not fair. Because there's legitimate people trying to get in through the proper immigration channels.
No more Tamils and lifeboats, eh?
Well, I hope not, because that isn't the right way of doing it.
But look what the Americans have just done to you. They've said to all the employers in the United States, if you have an illegal immigrant working for you, you can go to jail. So they're now heading them all north to our border.
Okay, but they won't be able to get into Canada now. That's part of what was announced this morning, that if they come to the Canadian border in a busload or however they come and claim refugee status, they'll be sent back to the U.S., and the U.S. has agreed with this, and they'll have to wait for their hearing.
They've got to stay in the United States.
Stay in the United States.
They'll come up, make an appointment for a hearing perhaps, and go back and wait till they're called.
That's right.
What you've done really is given to Canada what the U.S. has never given up. Is that right? The power of a border officer to stop somebody and say, we don't want you, go back.
Well, you've got to have your refugee claim reviewed. Everyone will be dealt with in the same way now. See, the other part of what was announced this morning is that we're no longer going to have what was called the B1 list. Mm-hmm. That was a list of 18 countries that up till now we have said we won't deport people back to those countries no matter what. And of course, what would happen, those people, if they came to Canada, they knew, even if they were refugees or not, they knew we wouldn't send them back. We've done away with that. So if a person comes from one of those countries, and Sri Lanka, there's a whole bunch of them, if they're not genuine refugees, then they will be sent back.
Anyone not granted status can be returned home, be it to Russia or Poland.
That's right. That's also in that category.
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, El Salvador, any country. Everyone will be treated the same.
And you've plugged another loophole, that people from countries whose citizens now require visas, like the Turkey scam,
right, they're going to require transit visas, because people were getting around that and coming in through the airports. Now, we require visas from 98 countries at the moment, so it's really most countries. And So that means that anyone coming, say they're going to the United States or they're going someplace else, they would get a flight that would stop in Canada.
Gander or Toronto or anywhere.
Switch planes, and when they got off the plane, they'd claim refugee status.
So now they can't get off the plane unless
they've got a visa.
Unless they've got a transit visa. This is really, I mean, I'm surprised at the strength of this for such a weak government.
Come on, Jack. Listen.
No, but seriously.
We act. It's not an easy issue to deal with because you've got to be sure you're acting within the law. Now, this is only step one. As Benny Bouchard, the minister, said, he will be introducing new legislation in March to deal with the processing of refugees.
There are going to be screams from the refugee support groups like you wouldn't believe.
There are already today. I've been hearing
I mean,
them.
and we only got 6,000 so-called refugees in the first 6 months, first six weeks of this year.
But you see, last year, our quota, generally speaking, we don't really have a total quota, expectation was 12,000 for the whole year. And last year, at the end of the year, it really started to go up and it went to 18,000. Well, in the first 6 weeks of this year, there were 6,000.
It's coming across from the States.
Both, airports and the States.
Guatemala, El Salvador, Chile.
El Salvador and Guatemala, I think, were coming in through the U.S., Chile through the airports, from some of the other countries, through this transit angle.
Don't you think your government will, if people who want that, your government will still back down if there's it says here, betrayal of Canada's long-time tradition of offering asylum to those fleeing repression and persecution?
No, I think that's not right. We still, for genuine refugees, I mean, if they are genuine and meet the criteria of the UN code, they will be allowed in after their hearing. But we're not just going to allow anybody just to come in here and work and, as they were able to do, get a minister's permits. There will no longer be minister's permits
Your government
given.
is prepared to take the heat on this?
Yeah.
Even Mulroney?
Even Mulroney, because I know from my own writing, that's what people want us to do. And I would hear from many people who have immigrated here in the recent years, and they were saying, we had to wait, we couldn't come in and just pretend we were refugees.
Yeah, there have been a lot of rip-offs in it, I must confess.
And,
does everyone go on welfare and medical right away?
But they won't be able to
Up to now?
The provinces had to look after that.
Ontario and Quebec look after that. I don't know what happens in British Columbia.
Actually, British Columbia, we haven't had the numbers here. We've only had 396 in the first 6 weeks.
You are a Conservative MP, 2.5 years, right. Mary Collins. And how soon do you want to see the hangman brought back?
Well, you know that Mazinkowski, our Deputy Prime Minister, introduced the motion in the House again the week before last. That's another commitment we made during the election and another commitment we're going to honor. The way it's going to work is there'll be a vote on the principle of reinstating capital punishment, a free vote, so we can vote whatever way we want as members of Parliament. If it passes, then a parliamentary committee will be asked to draft the legislation. They'll have 3 months to draft it.
I know that. That's not the question I asked.
What's the question
When do you want the noose to be brought back?
Well, Jack, you may have seen on the news last night. What I'm doing, because I made this promise during the election, and I keep my promises as, any way I can, try to, that I would poll my constituents, and I would vote in accordance to their wishes. So I have a householder going out to my constituents, setting out sort of briefly the arguments for and against. I hope people will really take the time to read it and think about it.
You will vote according to the majority of that poll?
Yeah.
You're evading your responsibilities.
No, I don't think
yes,
so.
You
On
are.
this particular issue,
this is a question of conscience.
Yeah, but I want to vote in accordance with how I feel how I know my constituents.
Supposing you had a poll on red light districts and they came back yes.
No, this is the only issue that I made this promise on. Actually, I would have preferred a referendum on this issue.
Throughout the country?
Yeah, but we're not having a referendum, so in a sense, I guess I'm doing that in a mini way.
Mary Collins, Conservative MP for Capilano. Your calls to her after the break. Mary Collins, proud of her government's new tough regulations on immigration, entry into Canada as a refugee.
Proud about the budget and proud about keeping our commitment on capital punishment. Three things this week.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. Mary, I didn't vote Conservative in the last election, but I certainly want to give you a pat on the back, and I'm glad to see that the government is finally taking the initiative and plugging these loopholes as far as these illegals coming in.
Good.
Good.
Well, I'm glad to appreciate that.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I live in Ms. Collins' riding, and I can't believe the cop-out she's pulling on this death penalty issue. She says she's going to send out a mail-out, and she's going to vote the way that her constituents want. I would hardly think that she's going to do this on all issues. And how about telling us how you feel about it, Ms. Collins? How about telling us where you stand on the issue before you send this handy-dandy mail-out?
Okay. The mail-out, sir, is to try to outline the issue and to give people both sides, just briefly, some of the arguments. And then there will be a proper poll done in March before the debate takes place in the House. And I'll use the results of that poll to guide me in my vote.
No, just hold on a minute, Ms. Collins. You see, what you're doing here is that let's say, for sake of argument, that this were to go through, we go back to capital punishment, something terrible goes wrong, you've got an easy out. You can just say, I voted the way my constituents wanted, without telling us beforehand how you feel about it. And that's what I want to know.
Okay, I will tell you how I feel about it.
Well, we're on the air now. Let's have it.
No, but I will tell you how I feel about it when I participate in the debate in the House, because I think that would prejudice the views of people in my constituency.
Okay.
I mean, you can agree or disagree, but that is the position that I said I would take, and only on this particular issue.
Do you have a position?
Election.
I must follow up this intrepid caller. Are you still there?
No, he's gone.
Do you have a personal position on capital punishment as of this moment?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
I'm not going to tell you right now.
And if it disagrees with your poll, you will change your opinion for the vote.
No, I will vote in accordance with my constituents' wishes.
In other words, if they say one side and you believe in the other side, you'll still vote for what they want.
That's right.
That's a cop-out.
I don't think it is. No, I don't think. On this particular issue, because people feel so strongly about it, and because I think the will of Canadians on this particular issue should dominate.
You have a case. Unusual for a politician to.
Well.
Go ahead, please.
Mary Collins, why do you have to make another poll when every poll that's ever been taken in the history of Gallup has shown that most Canadian people are in favor of capital punishment? And if you or any other member of Parliament in British Columbia vote against capital punishment, I will personally donate money and do everything I can to work against to have you not elected the next time around.
Okay, but I haven't done a poll in my riding from my constituents, and I think that's my responsibility.
Every Canadian Gallup poll or any other poll.
Oh, I know, I've read all the Gallup polls.
In other words, you're sure that the poll is going to coincide with your opinion anyway?
No, I'm not sure. I'll wait and see.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'm sorry to hit on you on the same topic again, but I'm wondering why we're not having a national referendum on the issue of capital punishment.
Well, I guess I kind of wonder that too. I think I would have liked to have seen that happen, so everyone would actually themselves have the chance to participate. But that is not the decision. I know it's a very cumbersome procedure, very expensive procedure, and so the government has not decided to go that route.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, isn't it something that should be worthy of further discussion?
Well, the decision has been taken, and we are going forward with the motion in the House, and then there will be the committee that will have public hearings. But that would only be in the event that the motion passes, and it will deal with things like for what crimes and in what way.
Let me ask you, caller, are you for or against capital punishment?
Well, I'm against it, but I'm for everybody speaking up and saying whether they're for or against it and why.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, hello, Jack Webster?
Yes, yes.
My name is Lena Graham, and I'm only phoning. I wanted to applaud the government for introducing this new regulations on refugees coming in that are not refugees. I'm an immigrant myself, and I feel people that are allowed into this country should at least have the ability to contribute something to the country.
Sure.
And a lot of those people will never do that.
Sure. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead from Victoria.
Hello. Yes, Miss Collins. I'd just like to say that I'm very, very happy that you're taking this stance. And the way you're doing it is the right way to represent your constituency. And I just hope that you can persuade some of those jerks that you're sitting with in the back benches to follow the line that you're doing.
Well,
I think that's the proper way of doing it.
Well, thank you. I know it's controversial, and a lot of people disagree with it, but it just happens to be what I decided I would do on this particular issue.
Go ahead from Duncan, BC.
Hello, Mary Collins. I am very interested in the capital punishment issue. I feel very, very strongly that if you bring this into being, the rich will get off and the poor will hang.
That's always been the tradition,
That's
ma'am.
been one of the issues, and that's an issue that I raise in the material that I've put together. I've tried to put on, the arguments for, the arguments against, and that has been a concern that people are, bring forward.
Well, thank you,
along
ma'am.
with a lot of other concerns.
Thank you. And you're almost bound to execute an innocent person somewhere along the way.
Well, okay, probably. Now, I don't know. I mean, it's not as if it's likely to be mandatory. I mean, I guess it is, should the option of capital punishment be available in certain circumstances.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to talk about the refugee situation.
Yes, please.
My wife is from New Zealand, and I had a hell of a time getting her landed immigrant status and medical. In fact, she was 7 months pregnant before I finally got BC medical for her. I'd just like to say that I'm sick of these certain television programs on this network and the other Canadian network that are applauding the refugee groups and that's fine. The ones that are in danger, fine. But I am sick and tired of it being abused, and I think the majority of Canadians are sick of it too. And that's all I got to say. And I say, Mary Collins, I'm one of your constituents, and I used your secretary actually for her to telex Sidney, Australia, to help my wife's situation along, and it did help, and I'd like to thank you and your secretary.
Thank you. Well, I think you express what most people have told me. They don't think people should be able to take advantage.
Right,
of
we're fed up,
the
and it's
system.
time to change, and I'm glad. I don't vote Conservative, but I'm bloody glad they finally did something about it.
Well, maybe you will next time.
There is a backlash, there's no doubt about it. I was watching the Journal last night, and I could see these delightful people saying, oh, none of the refugees takes jobs away from Canadians. They only take jobs that Canadians don't want. Such is not the case in British Columbia, I suspect.
Well, we're in a different economic situation
in fact,
out
it's
here.
two different countries. Toronto and here are just two different countries, economically.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Ms. Collins, when you were last out here with Brian Mulrooney, when he was at the Hotel Vancouver, you said you were going to back us in getting the Polar 8. I'm one of your constituents, a shipyard worker.
Oh, good.
Nothing about it since. Just a minute. And I got one other question to ask you, and that is, when are you going to announce it? And is Versatile going to get it? Or is some other shipyard going to get it that has a connection with one of your cabinet ministers?
No, listen, we're as frustrated on this Polar 8 because we want it to go ahead as quickly as possible. As of this week, Versatile sold off its farm machinery company in Winnipeg, and that had to happen first to get them into a financially viable situation. They're now working on that, and John Crosby said in the House this week, he said, we're moving west now with this thing. Hopefully it's only going to be a matter of days. It's very close. And there's only one shipyard in BC that can do it. That's Versatile.
I'm certain you're going to get it. It's a question of what design it's going to be, whether it's going to be a spoon-shaped or not.
Well, and I don't know what the answer is on
that.
that.
Mrs. Collins, the Canadian design, I think, is the best because the Russians are also interested in our designs. Now, if we get it from Finland, they're going to say, what do we need the Canadian design?
Good point, sir. Good point. Well, Mary Collins, you've been quite outspoken tonight. Many people will congratulate you on your crackdown on illegal immigrants. Don't know about capital punishment. You copped out on that.
No,
my thanks
I don't
to Mary
think so.
Collins.
You wait and listen to my debate in the House.
I'll be back after the break. Monday, I do a walkabout at Western Canada Steel on Twig Island, where jobs are in jeopardy because of the importation of steel from Mexico, produced at a much cheaper rate, and becomes intense competition for Canadian jobs. And also Otto Jelinek, the Minister of State for Fitness and, says here, amateur sport at 5 p.m. Precisely. Have a good weekend.